What if I told you that one of history's most powerful queens, the woman who unified Spain, funded Columbus, and built the modern Spanish Empire, made a vow so disgusting that it nearly brought plague to her own court? Isabella of Castile swore an oath that would make her undergarments legendary for all the wrong reasons. But was this tale of royal filth just medieval gossip? Or did Spain's most celebrated queen really refuse to change her underwear for nearly a decade? I'm your host, Chris, and this is Crimes the Crown, where we uncover the shocking secrets behind history's most powerful rulers. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most peculiar myths surrounding Isabella I of Castile, a legend that's almost certainly false, but reveals fascinating truths about medieval power, propaganda, and how history gets twisted into legend. Let me be clear from the start. The underwear story we're about to explore is almost certainly a myth, a tale invented decades after Isabella's death to emphasize her religious devotion. But this is the story of how that myth was born, why it spread across Europe, and what it tells us about a queen who really did transform a fractured peninsula into a unified empire, complete an 800-year holy war, and fund the voyage that changed the world forever. Our story begins in 1451 with the birth of Isabella of Castile. But this wasn't just any royal birth. This was the arrival of a woman who would reshape the world and allegedly refused to change her clothes for the better part of a decade. But before we get to the underwear, we need to understand the woman. Picture this: a medieval Spain fractured into warring kingdoms, where Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived in an uneasy balance that had persisted for centuries. Isabella grew up in this world of constant conflict. Her father, John II of Castile, ruled a kingdom plagued by noble rebellions. Her half-brother, Henry IV, was so ineffective that nobles nicknamed him Henry the Impotent, and not just because of rumors about his veteran performance. From childhood, Isabella learned that power wasn't inherited, it was seized. When she was just 6 years old, civil war erupted over the succession. Nobles questioned whether she was even legitimate. Some tried to marry her off to foreign princes to neutralize her claim. But Isabella had other plans. In 1469, at age 18, she made a decision that would change everything. She secretly married Ferdinand of Aragon, uniting the two most powerful Christian kingdoms in Spain. Now, this wasn't a romantic love match. This was a calculated power grab. Together, Isabella and Ferdinand commanded resources that could finally tip the balance in the centuries-old struggle for Iberian dominance. But their vision went beyond mere conquest. They dreamed of una España, one Spain united under one crown, following one faith. It was an ambitious goal that would require something unprecedented: the complete elimination of Muslim political power in Iberia. To try to understand Isabella's infamous vow, we need to understand the world she was trying to change. Medieval Spain wasn't the unified Catholic kingdom we might imagine. It was a complex tapestry of competing religions, cultures, and loyalties. For nearly 8 centuries since the Muslim conquest of 711, Christians had been fighting to reclaim Iberian territory in what they called the reconquista, the reconquest. But by Isabella's time, this wasn't just about territory anymore. It had become a holy war, a crusade to purify Spain of what Christians saw as foreign contamination. The last major Muslim stronghold was Granada, a glittering jewel of Islamic civilization nestled in the mountains of southern Spain. Its palaces were legendary, its scholars renowned throughout the Mediterranean world. But to Isabella and Ferdinand, it represented something else entirely: an affront to Christian dominance that had to be eliminated. The Nasrid dynasty that ruled Granada had survived for over 2 centuries by playing Christian kingdoms against one another, paying tribute when necessary, fighting when possible. They were skilled diplomats and fierce warriors, and taking Granada wouldn't just require military force. It would require commitment bordering an obsession. Now, to understand just how shocking Isabella's alleged vow would become, we need to talk about something that might surprise modern viewers: what hygiene actually meant in medieval Europe. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people weren't completely ignorant about cleanliness. They understood that certain smells and conditions can indicate disease, but their ideas about health and hygiene were different from ours. Medieval medicine was based on the theory of humors, the idea that health depended on balancing blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile in the body. Too much bathing was thought to open the pores and let in bad air or disease. Many physicians actually recommended against frequent washing. As for clothing, linen undergarments were luxury items. Most people owned perhaps 2 or 3 sets, and they were expensive to replace. Even royalty might go weeks between changes, especially during military campaigns. This context makes Isabella's alleged vow both more understandable and more shocking. 10 years, not 10 days, not 10 weeks. 10 years of the same undergarments during active military campaigning in the heat of southern Spain. Contemporary accounts suggest that even Isabella's own courtiers began to worry. In an age where bad air was thought to cause plague, the Queen's personal atmosphere was reportedly becoming concerning. Which brings us to 1482 and the moment that would either birth history's most disgusting legend or witness its most devoted religious vow. The target, Granada, the last Moorish stronghold in Spain. The stakes, the completion of Christian reconquest and the unification of Spain under Catholic rule. But this wasn't just any siege. Granada was a fortress that had withstood centuries of attacks. Its walls had seen the rise and fall of dynasties. Its defenders included some of the finest military minds in the Islamic world. Isabella and Ferdinand knew that taking Granada would require more than military might. It would require a demonstration of divine favor so powerful that it would inspire their troops and terrify their enemies. According to chroniclers, and here is where our myth begins to take shape, Isabella supposedly made a vow that would shock even her battle-hardened soldiers. The story claims she swore before God, her court, and her army that she would not change her undergarments until Granada fell to Christian forces. The ceremony was reportedly elaborate, though remember, this is likely a fabricated tale. The myth claims Isabella knelt before her confessor, placed her hand on a holy relic, and spoke the words that would make her undergarments famous throughout Europe. As Christ suffered for our sins, she allegedly declared, "So shall I suffer this small discomfort until his enemies are vanquished." The siege of Granada would last nearly 10 years, and the stories claim Isabella planned to personally oversee much of the campaign while maintaining this impossible vow. Now here's where we need to separate myth from reality. While Isabella's underwear allegedly grew more questionable by the day, which again almost certainly never happened, her very real military strategy grew more brilliant. She didn't just lay siege to Granada, she systematically conquered every Moorish stronghold leading to it, creating a noose of Christian territory around this last Muslim kingdom. This was warfare on an unprecedented scale. Isabella established permanent military camps, created supply lines that stretched across Spain, and pioneered new siege techniques that would later be used in the conquest of the Americas. Contemporary accounts describe a queen who personally oversaw siege engines, who slept in military camps, who funded the war by pawning her own jewels. She established field hospitals, coordinated with papal legates, and maintained diplomatic relations with other European powers, all while allegedly maintaining the same undergarments. Ronda fell in 1485 after a brutal siege, Malaga in 1487, but only after its defenders were reduced to eating leather and tree bark. Baza in 1489, its surrender negotiated through a combination of military pressure and financial incentives. With each victory, Isabella's reputation as an iron-willed commander grew, but so apparently did the legendary state of her undergarments and the concern of those around her. Court physicians allegedly began warning of pestilence and corrupted air around the queen. Servants reportedly drew lots to avoid close attendance duties. Some chronicles claim that Isabella's tent had to be positioned downwind from the rest of the camp. But while we've been focusing on Isabella's personal hygiene habits, something far more sinister was unfolding during this Granada campaign. This wasn't just a military conquest. It was the beginning of what would become one of history's most systematic programs of religious persecution. The Spanish Inquisition, established by Isabella and Ferdinand in 1478, was already operating throughout their territories. Conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity, were being investigated, tortured, and executed on suspicion of secretly practicing their former faith. Isabella's religious obsession, the same devotion that allegedly kept her in the same underwear for years, was manifesting in increasingly brutal ways. Auto de fe ceremonies, where heretics were burned alive, became public spectacles designed to demonstrate the power of Catholic orthodoxy. The irony is inescapable. While Isabella was allegedly creating a biological hazard in her personal clothing, she was systematically cleansing Spain of religious diversity. Her commitment to purity was both personal and political, both ridiculous and terrifying. And this religious fervor was about to reach its climax. Because as Granada's walls finally began to crumble, Isabella was already planning the next phase of her purification campaign, one that would affect hundreds of thousands of people. January 2nd, 1492. After nearly 10 years of warfare, after countless battles and sieges, after Isabella had allegedly worn the same undergarments through summer heat, winter cold, and everything in between, the moment finally arrived. The gates of Granada swung open. The last Moorish king, Boabdil, called El Rey Chico, or the Boy King, rode out to surrender the keys of the city to Isabella and Ferdinand. 800 years of Muslim political rule in Spain was finally ending. The ceremony was carefully choreographed. Boabdil dismounted, knelt before the Catholic monarchs, and handed over the keys to the Alhambra. Isabella, according to witnesses, wept, whether from joy, relief, or the overwhelming smell of her own clothing. The chronicles don't specify. And according to legend, Isabella finally changed her underwear. The garments she removed were reportedly so aromatic that they were burned rather than washed. Some sources claim that they were first displayed as relics of royal devotion before finally, hastily destroyed for public health reasons. But here's what makes this story remarkable. While Isabella was allegedly making fashion history for all the wrong reasons, she was also making world history for the right ones. The completion of the Reconquista didn't just unify Spain, it freed up resources, attention, and national confidence for something that would change everything. Because just months after Granada fell, after Isabella had finally changed clothes, she would make the decision that would reshape the globe, funding an Italian navigator named Christopher Columbus, who claimed he could reach the Indies by sailing west. But wait, did any of this actually happen? Let's investigate the evidence, because the truth about Isabella's underwear is more complex than you might think. The earliest mention of Isabella's underwear vow appears in chronicles written decades after her death. The most detailed account comes from Gonzalo Ferdinand de Oviedo, writing in the 1540s, 50 years after the events, when most eyewitnesses were already dead. Oviedo claims to have heard the story from veterans of the Granada campaign, but he's also known for, let's say, embellishing his tales. Other contemporary chroniclers, people who were actually there, make no mention of this underwear vow. But here's what we know for certain. Isabella was deeply religious. She did personally oversee the Granada campaign. She was also known for making dramatic religious vows, and she spent years living in military camps under harsh conditions. Military accounts show that Isabella maintained a mobile court throughout the campaign, moving from siege to siege, often sleeping in tents and temporary structures. She did pawn her jewels to fund the war. She did suffer from various illnesses during the campaign, and she did make numerous religious vows and pledges. But the underwear story? It might be what historians call a pious fiction, a tale invented to emphasize her dedication. Medieval undergarments were expensive linen items, often passed down through generations. A little disgusting if you ask me. Most people, even royalty, owned very few, so the idea of not changing them for months wasn't as shocking as it sounds to us today. However, 10 years would have been an extreme even by medieval standards, and the health implications would have been extremely serious to say the least. Medieval physicians understood that certain bodily conditions could lead to disease, even if they didn't yet understand germ theory. But whether true or false, this story served a purpose. It transformed Isabella from just another conquering monarch into a symbol of unwavering religious devotion. It also conveniently obscured some of the darker aspects of her reign. The tale spread throughout Europe, becoming part of Isabella's legend. Protestant countries used it to mock Catholic superstition. while Catholic nations celebrated it as an example of holy dedication. The truth became less important than the story's symbolic power. What's fascinating is how the story evolved, though. Early versions focus on Isabella's religious devotion. Later versions emphasize the health hazards and court reactions. By the 18th century, some accounts claim that Isabella's underwear vow nearly caused a plague outbreak in the Spanish court. Each generation reshaped the story to fit their own concerns about power, religion, and personal hygiene. The underwear became a metaphor for everything from royal excess to religious fanaticism to the dangers of absolute monarchy. Because while we've been talking about underwear, let's not forget what Isabella actually accomplished and the price the world paid for her achievements. The Spanish Empire that emerged from Isabella's reign would span continents. The gold and silver that flowed from the Americas would finance European wars for literal centuries. The cultural and biological exchange between old and new worlds would reshape human civilization. But this empire was built on foundations that would horrify us today. The completion of the Reconquista was followed immediately by the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492, the very same year Columbus sailed and Granada fell. Between 40,000 and 200,000 Jews were forced to flee their homeland, abandoning property and possessions. Many died in exile. Those who converted to Christianity faced constant suspicion from the Inquisition, and Muslims faced similar persecution. Despite initial promises of religious tolerance, Islamic practices were very quickly banned, Arabic books burned, and forced conversions implemented. The rich multicultural society of medieval Spain was systematically destroyed. And then there were the consequences for the Americas. The same religious fervor that drove Isabella's Reconquista would fuel Spanish conquistadors' devastation of indigenous civilizations. Millions would die from disease, warfare, and exploitation. All of this achieved by a woman who, if the stories are true, refused to change her underwear for the better part of a decade. The contrast between personal obsession and global consequences is almost too bizarre to believe. So, what's the truth about Isabella's infamous undergarments? After examining all the evidence, here's what I think. The story is most likely false, but it reveals something true about Isabella and her age. Whether she actually made that disgusting vow or not, Isabella of Castile was a woman of extraordinary determination and troubling obsessions. She completed the Reconquista, unified Spain, funded the discovery of America, and established the Spanish Empire. She also initiated some of history's most systematic programs of religious persecution, though. The underwear story endures because it captures the contradictions of medieval royal power, the gap between public grandeur and private squalor, between religious devotion and practical politics, between personal sacrifice and global consequence. Isabella's legacy is complex. She was a skillful military commander and a ruthless religious extremist. She was also a pioneering female ruler and an architect of cultural genocide. She funded exploration that expanded human knowledge and conquest that destroyed entire civilizations. Modern Spain still grapples with Isabella's legacy. Is she a national hero who created the Spanish nation, or a religious fanatic whose policies led to centuries of persecution? The answer probably depends on whether your ancestors were among the conquerors or the conquered. But here's what I find most fascinating about this underwear story. It humanizes one of history's most powerful rulers. It reminds us that even absolute monarchs were still people, people with bodies, with habits, with personal quirks that seem absurd to us today. So here's the question I want to leave you with. In our age of sanitized history and simplified narratives, what do we make of complex figures like Isabella? Can we acknowledge both her achievements and her crimes? Can we laugh at the absurdity of the underwear story while recognizing the tragedy of her religious policies? What do you think? Did Isabella really make that infamous vow? Or is it just medieval fake news designed to make her seem more pious? Was she a visionary leader who unified Spain, or a religious extremist whose policies caused immeasurable suffering? Or can she be both? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts and how we should remember figures like Isabella. If you enjoyed this deep dive into royal hygiene and historical complexity, smash that like button, subscribe to Crimes of the Crown for more shocking stories from history's most powerful rulers, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an investigation. And if you want to dive deeper into Isabella's story, check out the sources I've linked in the description. If I remember, the real history is even more fascinating than the legends. Remember, sometimes the most unbelievable stories about history's greatest figures reveal the most truth about human nature and the corrupting influence of power. Until next time, keep questioning everything you think you know about the past. Because whether or not Isabella changed her underwear, she definitely changed the world, and we are still living with the consequences.